Welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast, your North Star for mastering endurance training and holistic health. Join us each week as renowned sports scientist and founder of Athletica.ai, Paul Laursen, along with athlete, coach, and sports scientist Marjaana Rakai, and coach and cyclist Paul Warloski, guide you through the maze of often confusing training principles. Make sure your compass is ready. Class is now in session. Hello and welcome to another listener question episode of the Athlete's Compass, where we navigate training, fitness, and health for everyday athletes. This is our second listener question episode, where we take questions from the Athletica forum, from social media, and directly from our athletes and turn them over to our experts so we can discuss them. So here's question number one from Carlos Hurtado from El Salvador. After the initial test week, does Athletica program other test weeks regularly, or does it automatically adjust zones according to the identified progress being made by the athlete? So how does Athletica read the test program? How often should we be testing?
Well, I'll start with that one, Marjaana, if that's okay. And I think, so it's basically if you onboard onto Athletica, if you're an early user of the program, what automatically gets programmed in is a test week. And if you're a cyclist, you're going to get like an FTP, functional threshold power test, and you're going to get a power profile test. And these are going to be the key tests that determine your workout zones. And and in the running context, including triathletes, you're going to get a Jack Daniels 5K maximal run test. And if you're, again, a triathlete and you're going to be doing swimming, you're going to do a CSS test, a critical swim speed test. Maximal 50 meters, maximal 400 meters time trial. Okay, so all those time trials and all-out efforts coordinate a power or pace profile that really pinpoints your capacities as an athlete from the threshold or critical power model. So what is your sustained intensity? And then in general, what is the, what are the other zones that fall from that? And we generally have a 5-zone heart rate model, and we have a 7-zone pace and power model. And we'll be talking about that shortly in subsequent sessions. That's what you can imagine you'd want to kick off with something like that, because that, if you get that data and that knowledge into Athletica relatively soon, that means that your training sessions are going to be catered to your ability. And that's the key purpose of that testing. Now, more to your question, Carlos, like when do those come back? Well, whenever you restart a plan onto a new event, right? So you want to, now it's time to do a marathon, or now it's time to do a 5K or a triathlon, whatever it may be. Whenever you restart your plan, that's usually a good time to at least ask, should I do another test? And you have the option. The default is to do that test. Of course, you have the option also to not do that test. And for that, you simply tick skip test week. And that's, one of the key questions we get from users is actually, can I have a plan without a test, or can I get my test back? And it's yes to all of those things, right? So you just have to kind of go back and either click the box that skips that test week if you don't want it, or reset your plan to get that test week. Finally, one other thing I'll just mention on this, and Marjaana, I'm sure you probably would have mentioned this too, because you taught me this, and that's if you want to have your test week in, you just have to simply find that test, save it to your library, and then you can put it in there whenever you want to retest yourself if you think those zones have gone up. So I'm going to stop there and tell me what I've missed, Paul or Marjaana.
I think you got it.
I think so too. Just to make sure that you were talking about in the settings, is that's where the that information where we check the test box.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. You absolutely in the settings there is where you do that. And then I guess the other thing, the other point that Carlos made is, when will these when will they be updated? And here's the cool thing about Athletica. So say you go in there and you do a key set, like something that's pretty hard, like maybe it was a short interval workout, or some sort of even if say you do a race and you record that race, and sometimes that's where you really see your performance displayed, right? And it sits there in your device, and once that device file is uploaded, and if Athletica calculates that you've all of a sudden hit personal bests in terms of your performance, well, it re-updates that, or at least it will give you the prompt to say, oh, you hit a new threshold. We would suggest that you accept these. Would you like to? And you always have that option to accept or decline the the recommendation that it's giving. And in case you're wondering, listeners, what should I accept it or not? Well, if you've done an honest effort with a solid rating of perceived exertion, and the number is higher, then you absolutely should accept that recommended change. The reason why we don't just automatically do it is because machines are prone to error, right? It's not like, say for example, you got in your car and you forgot to turn your stopwatch off, which happens from time to time, right, Marjaana? You see you laughing there. So we've all done this, right? We just have a total brain fart, and you start you totally miss that. And you're obviously at that point, you're going to get an incredibly Usain Bolt type sustained running pace. It's just completely improbable. And in that case, if you're prompted to change your threshold, you should of course decline it. So these are why we have those safeguards on that. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, sometimes if you haven't run like longer runs or tempo runs, harder runs for a while, then it tends to take some random lower number, and then your load becomes a little bit screwed because I don't know what happened a couple of weeks ago. My 5K TT was suddenly a lot slower than it was supposed to be.
Yeah, that's right.
It was around 30 minutes per 5K. And then I did an easy run, and the load that it calculated was something like 100 something, which was way too much of a load, just because my threshold and all the intensity zones were now not accurate. So
that's right. So calculation of your zones is pretty important, or the loading is going to be off. You're absolutely right, Marjaana.
Yeah. So if you skip the test week, when you start with Athletic and you skip the test week, you're like, oh no, I don't see the point of doing these tests. There's your point.
Absolutely.
Your load will be way too low or way too high so we want to do the test week. And as you have good training, you can also feel like you need to do the test week again, or some of the test, not the whole test week necessarily. When bike rides intervals seem too easy, or the target zones seem too easy.
Good point.
Then go back and reschedule that test so you can get it updated.
Great advice.
Yeah, I have noticed that as I am returning to some health after my heart issues, it is adjusting often, the Athletica program. So it's been nice, as I gain some fitness back, it has been adjusting quite often in positive. Sometimes it goes backwards, and I was like, oh, I don't accept those, of course. It's like, I don't want to go backwards.
Yeah, I've experienced those ones too.
Yeah, it's like, I don't like that. Our second question, from Patrick D123 and my athlete Gabriel. Despite my plan being set as a high volume or a mid volume, is it normal that there are no rest days scheduled for at least 3 weeks? We had a lot of questions, or we had several questions on the forum at Athletica about rest days and rest weeks. Paul, could you talk about how Athletica structures rest weeks and or rest days?
Yes, absolutely. So, the very first thing on this topic that I will mention is that if you need a rest week or a rest day, then you need to take it very first and foremost. So the reason why you might see less of a rest day structure in there is because one of the key principles that we know enhances your adaptation is something we call the consistency of cell signaling. So we all respond. We're all a bunch of cells, and our cells in our body, they adapt to this signal or stimulus that you give them. So the more you repeat that stimulus or signal, the more we change our body. I think we've spoken around previous episodes of the fact that our cells are always turning over in our body. Remember, and again, red blood cells are a classic example. They turn over every 120 days. You get a whole brand new set based on the food that you eat. And again, so this is the body works completely like this. You're a different person than you were 6 months ago, completely from a a makeup sort of side. And yeah, I mean, Marjaana, you've got a great story about all of that, right? Like you just prove it, right? Like this is the kind of cool thing, right? In terms of like your transformation can be actually quite rapid. So just never forget that. And that's the reason. So the reason we're doing that kind of is because we want that consistent signaling. Now, getting that stress just right is just so key. So this is why for many people they have a hard time getting around getting the concept in their head where you don't go to exhaustion in a workout. So this is why we like to have like these smaller bite-sized pieces of workouts, and not these workouts that totally bin you where you have to, like, you're just in the bin the next day. We want to remember this concept that the best workout is the next workout, or the most important workout is the next workout. And this is why we do these repeated sort of sessions. And again, all with a caveat where if you need a rest day, then you need a rest day and you should take it. And this is why you can move, click, drag, do, workout wizard, delete, whatever you kind of need to do to get that consistency in your training. But this is what we know works best. We know this works best in professionals and also age groups. And there's a big forum thread. I forget who it was, but someone gave an incredibly a very detailed testimony of this exact same concept where, he didn't believe this either. And, but he went through the whole process, did these smaller bite-sized chunks, and, with great success thereafter. So any follow-ups there, Marjaana?
Yeah, I don't really believe in periodization rest weeks, like the typical 3 weeks on, 1 week off. Although it can be easy for people to, schedule something else in their schedule, knowing that, okay, my rest week is coming, then I can do something else. And from a female athlete perspective, we all have a cycle. And if we've been paying attention to our menstrual cycle, which I highly recommend, either using pen and paper method or using one of the apps out there to track your cycle, you'll start to learn your cycle and the symptoms, because sometimes we just feel really crappy. And then I would definitely recommend taking a few days easy or even days off. Like my cycle, day one is horrible. And that's usually when I take a day off. If I'm like, the cramps are just, yeah. not fun. So I can't get myself jump on the bike or anything. And that's fine. So usually I take a day or two off depending my symptoms. Some women tend to feel like they lack pop. They lack the snappy legs like the week before. And then just don't push it. Like listen to your body and take a few days easy.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe Paul, you can talk to the female athlete study if there's been any, findings how women feel.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we have any findings on that issue per se, but I kind of reflect on I forget her last name. It's a hyphenated Lauren Semple. I forget the last one, but basically we had her on the Training Science podcast. She's a PhD researcher in this area from McMaster University in Canada. This is her whole PhD, and what she said on this exact issue that you mentioned, Marjaana, is that you do just have to take those days, those down days. She described it for the guys that are listening and they're still here. It's she describes it as it's like having the flu. It's basically you just kind of feel crappy. And that's, if your central nervous system is feeling crappy, then you just got to take some more time off. So that's the first practical message. Just do what you're talking about, Marjaana. On to the study. I presented a little bit of this in the Endurance Exchange conference I just got back to in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was presenting some of our data on the, what was it called? Basically the menstrual cycle hormones and how they fluctuate relative to heart rate variability. And I guess the interesting finding is the potential lowering of heart rate variability, suggesting you're falling more into sympathetic versus parasympathetic stress at the time of the luteal phase of the cycle. So you're falling more into the luteal phase, and so that's after ovulation, before menses. So that's kind of typically when you are seeing that increase in sympathetic response. What that means, you could potentially start killing things, or I'm not sure. With sympathetic stress rising, we're starting to see a rise in whatever comes with the sympathetic system, fight or flight system, little fighting and flighting.
Yeah, and that's typically when we experience PMS and want to murder everybody.
Well, there you go. So that's there's an association there. Higher levels of progesterone. Yeah, luteal phase. So that's kind of interesting. What do you do with that, women, in terms of programming? We don't know that yet. This is the very first. We're in the first phase of this. We're what we call fishing experiments, where it's we're just finally getting the insight into testing these kinds of variables in the field. And just to be clear, this is using the Mira Care fertility tracking app, where women will pee on a little wand stick that gets inserted into a meter that can determine 4 metabolites, things like estrogen, progesterone, and some other gonadal hormones. So I think, Marjaana, you might have been a study participant in that at one point.
I was, but I think my training
in Dubai wasn't good.
My data was more of a detraining than training, but it was really interesting study to be part of. But I mean, if your hormones are going all whack the last week before period starts, then maybe that's a good, common sense kind of thing. Just take it easy.
Yep.
And that's what I heard in the answers is that, Paul, you initially said in answering the question, why, if you need a rest day, if you need a rest week, take it. And the program Athletica is designed so that there are a lot of small doses. So you don't necessarily need a specific rest day or rest week, but when you do feel like you need it, take it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah, I mean, health. I think we've spoke at length on many other podcasts. Health has to be first. It's just an unsustainable program otherwise. And if you're doing the the no pain, no gain training philosophy, it just doesn't work for very long, and eventually it'll derail you. So we know that it's common sense to me, right? It's just that consistency of the cell signaling, that consistent training with consistent health is what makes the biggest gains in your ability to perform. And that's usually what we want to do in Athletica. We want to improve our health, and that gets displayed to us and our friends when we perform.
Question number 3 is about the strength options within Athletica. Ashley asks, is there a strength option within Athletica? So I'm going to assume she's on a low volume plan. It's important for me to lift weights besides run, bike, and swim. And Green Biker asks, what is the right way to record strength training sessions, or do they need to be recorded at all? So we had several questions about the value of doing strength training and how to include more of it in different plans in Athletica. Let's just, we're going to have an episode about strength training, but Paul, you recently had Erin Carson on the Training Science podcast. She is pretty amazing, but what did you learn from her about the importance of strength training for endurance athletes?
Oh, I guess quite a bit, Paul. Erin is quite the legend. Like, you name the professional, and she seems to coach them, right? So one of the most talked about triathletes right now, Taylor Nibbs, is that her last name? So yeah, she's Taylor's strength trainer, and so yeah, I guess the long and the short of it is we know quite clearly that it benefits you to have, 1 or 2 or 3 training sessions that are strength based in the week. And if you're not doing at least something in that realm, you're probably missing out on a key component. And maybe it's because, we typically swim, bike, run, and we do that endurance stuff, and you just, at the simple level, you need to have something that's a little bit of a different stimulus. There's a variety of different adaptations that might occur, but the biggest one tends to be this conversion of the fast twitch fibers into more fatigable, less fatigable, so they become more resilient with more slow twitch kind of properties. So it's technically the conversion of type 2X fibers to type 2A fibers. And we had Inigo Majuka on the podcast, Training Science podcast, and we went over this as well. And yeah, so it's so yes, I guess, Paul, you want to have something in your week. Now, what do you want to have in there? Well, now again, we're coming back to context. We're coming back to the individual. Not everyone, if you're right off the couch and you've never done strength training before, well, you better start really simple, right? With some simple body weight exercises just to kind of get us going before we rock up to the squat rack and these sorts of things, right? But yeah, you want to develop them, the motor patterns sort of first, of doing these kinds of pushing, pulling, squatting kind of exercises. And then you want to increase the load and make it different than what you're getting as an endurance athlete when you run, bike, and swim.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, we're always going linearly forward. And that's what we're really good at. But if we don't do any strength or mobility sideways or rotational, then we, one day brush our teeth or open the door with our foot and, we get hurt. But like, even from a female athlete perspective as well, like, strength training is so important because we start losing muscle mass after 30. And I've always enjoyed strength training. So I've been strength training since I was 14 with weights. So it's a few decades now. And I think that's why I'm still improving in endurance, because I have the muscle mass that I have. But not everybody have done strength training, and they don't know how to move. They don't know how to lift heavy. So yeah, echoing what you said, Paul, is we need to learn the correct movement patterns before we start loading them with heavier weights. So we can't just take somebody and prescribed online lift heavy 5 times 5 reps. That would be not very
That's
disastrous.
Smart. Yeah.
And not just muscle mass we start losing, Marjaana, but we also start losing bone mass. And both of these factors are really, really critical. We want to hold on to these as long as we can, as we're all aging, moment by moment. And strength training is one of the key factors that also increases our bone mass, because the bones respond by developing the calcium phosphate strength on them, due to the forces that we place on those bones. That's what drives remember we talked about earlier, the signaling, right? So the signaling of that heavy force and strain within those bones. Well, the bone responds nicely by grabbing more calcium phosphate around the blood. So that's what kind of does it. Now, onto Athletica, we'll see some very simple exercises on there, and that's some of the complaints by some people. Well, these are quite simple, and yes, they are. There are a lot of them are kind of things like single leg squats, developing plyometrics. Plyometric means like you're kind of you're landing and you're developing like when you're sort of dropping down and you're grabbing onto that that eccentric kind of phase of muscle lengthening. And again, it's like jumping down off of a box, say, for example. That would be an example of a plyometric. And these are just simple, so they can be done by just about everyone. But by all means, develop these yourself. If you have a classic Garmin watch, we can just hit the strength mode and we can record what's actually being done. It's how much that's actually measuring the load is probably not great at this point in time, if we're honest. But there's many really cool devices that are on their way towards impacting us in the future. So I just happen to have one here. This is one of the companies that we're collaborating on creating this, and this company's called Output. And basically we put like this little IMU on us, on our person. We can actually determine the strain or a measurement actually of some of the forces that are occurring on us in a variety of different forms. We can measure our balance. I can put this on my squat rack and I can count the number of reps and record the tonnage. So we're working on things like that. We're also collaborating with Matt Jordan, who is one of the world's greatest strength and conditioners. And we're working with him on embedding some of his strength training plans and videos into Athletica. But this is all going to hopefully kind of come out in the next year or so. These innovations do take a little bit of time, but hang in there with us. And some really special things in the strength and conditioning world are coming to Athletica.
I know for my athletes and for myself, I add a separate workout listing the strength training exercises, the goblet squats, the rows, and I'll add that in as a separate workout, save it to my library, and then assign that to my athletes. And then using the plyometric workout from Athletica as essentially a warm-up, as a mobility warm-up to get everything firing before doing any kind of deadlifts or goblet squats. And that's been working really well.
And this is perfect. And this is exactly where, Athletica coaches like Paul and Marjaana are just so awesome at being able to individualize these types of workouts for their clients. So, I can't recommend these two enough. If you're out there listening and you need a coach that knows how to use Athletica, please make sure you hit these two up.
That is all for this week. Thanks for listening, and join us next week when we answer a listener question about what happens in our bodies when we train, but more importantly, why understanding how those adaptations work can improve our performance. For Marjaana Rakai and Dr. Paul Laursen, I'm Paul Warloski, and this has been the Athletes Podcast. The Athletes Compass Podcast. Let's get it right. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Athletes Compass Podcast, your guiding light through the complex world of training for your endurance sport. For a deeper dive into the science, listen to our companion podcast, the Training Science Podcast, and check out the AI adaptive training platform, Athletica.ai. Thanks.